me to leave now.
What? I'm just having tea.
Manager says you're making people uncomfortable. You're trespassing.
I bought this oolong 15 minutes ago. I'm not bothering anyone.
Are you leaving or do I need to remove you?
You're making a
I
mistake.
don't care if you're
CIA
president,
special.
you're leaving. Wait, let's go.
Sheriff Walter Monaco had been with the King County Sheriff's Office for 9 years when he walked into a situation that would destroy his career and cost the county $15.3 million. He was 34 years old, experienced enough to know better, but apparently convinced that his judgment was infallible. One Tuesday morning in a crowded downtown Seattle tea house, he received a call from a nervous manager about a suspicious person who didn't belong there. The suspicious person was Special Agent Joann Gilbert, a 17-year CIA veteran sitting alone with her laptop and tea, conducting covert national security surveillance. What Monaco did next, ignoring her credentials, dismissing witness testimony, and arresting her in front of dozens of mourning customers, would become a textbook example of how racial profiling destroys lives, careers, and classified intelligence operations. If you are ready to see injustice and institutional racism taken down in our society, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let's continue. Summit Street. Tea House sits on the corner of Pine Street and 4th Avenue in downtown Seattle. It's the kind of place that fills up every morning with professionals seeking quiet focus before their workday begins. Lawyers, consultants, tech workers, graduate students. High ceilings, reclaimed wood tables, pendant lights casting warm pools over each seating area, and a tea menu that reads like a sommelier's wine list. Silver Needle, Oolong, First Flush Darjeeling, rare blends that cost $12 a pot. It was 8:15 in the morning on a Tuesday in late October. Rain tapped steadily against the tall front windows. The morning rush was in full swing. Every table was occupied. The line at the counter stretched, nearly to the door. Steam rose from ceramic pots. Laptops glowed. Conversations hummed low beneath the acoustic playlist drifting from overhead speakers. Special Agent Joann Gilbert had been with the Central Intelligence Agency for 17 years. 17 years working cases that required precision, patience, and an ability to disappear into the background while tracking adversaries who operated in the shadows. She'd spent 9 years in counterintelligence, dismantling foreign espionage networks that targeted U.S. defense contractors and federal agencies. 5 years before that in the Directorate of Operations, running assets in hostile territories and coordinating with allied intelligence services across 3 continents. 3 years in analysis before that, building profiles of state-sponsored actors who laundered money through shell corporations and encrypted communications. She'd testified in closed congressional hearings. She'd coordinated with the National Security Council and Department of Defense. She'd trained junior officers in surveillance tradecraft and counter-surveillance protocols. She'd received the Intelligence Commendation Medal twice. Her supervisors called her methodical. Her colleagues called her the agent who never broke cover. At 41 years old, Joann Gilbert was exactly where she'd worked to be, trusted, respected, and given responsibility for complex operations that required both intelligence and absolute composure. That Tuesday morning, Gilbert was on duty, but her mission required invisibility. She'd arrived at Summit Street Tea House at 7:50 in the morning, ordered a pot of Silver Needle white tea and a scone, and claimed a small corner table near the window, with a clear line of sight to the front door and the restroom hallway. She'd opened her laptop and spent the next 25 minutes reviewing what appeared to be market research data, charts, spreadsheets, innocuous business documents. She wore a tailored, navy blouse over dark jeans and low-heeled ankle boots. Professional, but not obviously law enforcement. Her CIA credentials were in her purse on the chair beside her. Her service weapon was locked in her vehicle 2 blocks away. She rarely carried on surveillance assignments where blending in mattered more than firepower. She looked like what she was pretending to be. A consultant working remotely before a client meeting. She'd done nothing to attract attention. She'd spoken to no one except the barista who'd taken her order. Her eyes never lingered too long on any one person. She sipped her tea slowly. She turned pages on her laptop at irregular intervals. She was a ghost. But to one person in that tea house, Joann Gilbert's presence was a problem, and that person had decided to do something about it. Ethan Caldwell was 25 years old. He'd been the assistant manager at Summit Street Tea House for 14 months, hired straight out of a hospitality management program with ambitions of eventually opening his own boutique cafe. He was enthusiastic, detail-oriented, and deeply concerned about maintaining what he called the right atmosphere for the shop. He wanted Summit Street to be a place where customers felt comfortable, a place where the regular clientele, mostly white, mostly affluent, mostly tech professionals, felt like they belonged. And this morning, Ethan Caldwell had noticed something that made him uncomfortable. A black woman sitting alone, working on a laptop, taking up a prime window table during the busy morning rush. She'd been there for nearly 40 minutes on a single tea purchase. In Caldwell's mind, something didn't add up. This wasn't the usual customer. She didn't look like she fit the Summit Street profile. She must be using the space without contributing to turnover. She must be camping out for free Wi-Fi. She was taking up a table that higher-spending customers needed. Never mind that she was a paying customer. Never mind that she was impeccably dressed. Never mind that dozens of other people in the shop had been there just as long or longer, many nursing the same single drink. Caldwell saw a black woman and decided she didn't belong. He watched her for 10 more minutes, working up the nerve to act. Then he pulled out his phone and called the non-emergency line for King County Sheriff's Dispatch. The call was brief. Caldwell described a person loitering for an extended period and making customers uncomfortable. The dispatcher asked standard questions. Was the person threatening, causing a disturbance? No. But she'd been there a really long time, and her presence was creating an uncomfortable atmosphere just by being there. Was she a paying customer? Caldwell hesitated. She'd bought tea, but that was nearly 40 minutes ago. Had she violated any store policies? Not exactly, but he needed her to leave. The call was logged. A unit was dispatched. Sheriff Walter Monaco responded. Do you think managers should face consequences for calling police on customers based on racial bias? Drop your answer below. Walter Monaco had been with the King County Sheriff's Office for 9 years. In that time, he'd compiled a record that should have raised alarm at every level of supervision. 14 complaints. 14. 5 of them involved sustained findings of racial profiling or excessive use of force against people of color. The other 9 had been closed with insufficient evidence or administrative findings that stopped short of discipline, despite witness statements and body camera footage. Monaco had a pattern. He responded aggressively to calls involving people of color in spaces where he didn't think they belonged. A black man jogging through a residential neighborhood in Bellevue, Monaco detained him for 20 minutes, demanding identification and questioning whether he lived in the area. A Hispanic family gathered for a birthday picnic at a public park. Monaco demanded proof of residency and threatened citations when they questioned his authority. An Asian woman photographing the waterfront for a travel blog, Monaco, questioned whether she was conducting reconnaissance for a hostile entity. The pattern was documented. The evidence was extensive, but somehow Monaco remained on patrol. His supervisors noted in evaluations that he was proactive but sometimes lacking in community relations skills, and that he should consider additional training in de-escalation techniques. But those notes never translated into meaningful consequences. When Monaco received the call about Summit Street Tea House, his mind immediately constructed a narrative. Loitering suspect. Manager wants removal, probably homeless, probably causing problems, probably doesn't belong in an upscale establishment. He arrived at the tea house at 8:27 in the morning, parking his patrol vehicle directly in front. He walked in, scanning the crowded space, looking for someone who seemed out of place. His eyes landed on Joann Gilbert almost immediately. A black woman sitting alone, laptop open, looking far too comfortable. In Monaco's mind, that had to be the problem. Sheriff Walter Monaco pushed through the steamed glass doors of Summit Street Tea House on a rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle, his boots leaving wet prints on the polished oak floor as the scent of oolong and steamed milk hit him. The shop was packed. Professionals tapped on laptops beneath pendant lights. Students hunched over textbooks with earbuds trailing from their ears. The morning rush hummed with low conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. Monaco's gaze swept the room with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to spot threats. He scanned faces, posture, behavior, looking for whoever didn't belong. His eyes landed on Special Agent Joann Gilbert. She sat alone at a corner table near the window, 41 years old, composed and still, wearing a tailored navy blouse and dark jeans. Her laptop was open in front of her, the screen angled just enough to shield it from casual observation. A half-empty pot of silver needle tea sat beside her, the pale liquid catching the gray morning light. Her purse rested on the chair next to her. Her hands moved across the keyboard in short, deliberate intervals, typing, pausing, scrolling, never hurried. To Monaco, she was the obvious problem. 20 minutes earlier, Ethan Caldwell had stood behind the counter, watching this same woman with growing unease. He'd noticed her the moment she'd walked in, not because she'd done anything unusual, but because she didn't match the profile he'd constructed in his mind of who belonged at Summit Street. She was too calm, too settled, too comfortable, occupying space in an establishment that catered to a mostly white, mostly affluent clientele. Caldwell convinced himself that this impeccably dressed black woman didn't fit the vibe. She must be loitering. She must be taking advantage. She must be making other customers uncomfortable, even though no one had complained, even though she'd purchased tea and claimed a table like every other person in the shop. He'd dialed the non-emergency line, describing her as someone who'd been loitering for a long time and creating an uneasy atmosphere. The dispatcher logged the call. A unit was sent. Now Monaco was here. He crossed the room with deliberate authority, arms loose at his sides, his uniform and badge drawing glances from nearby tables. He stopped directly beside Gilbert's table, positioning himself so she'd have to look up to see him. Gilbert became aware of the presence before she looked up. She registered the shift in the room's energy, the subtle quieting of nearby conversations, the weight of someone standing too close. She lifted her eyes from the screen and saw the sheriff, arms crossed now, staring down at her with an expression that managed to be both blank and accusatory. Monaco's voice was low, authoritative, stripped of courtesy. The manager had called. She was making people uncomfortable. She needed to leave. Now. Gilbert blinked, momentarily confused. She glanced around the shop. Dozens of people working, drinking, talking. No one was looking at her. No one had been looking at her. She turned back to Monaco, her voice calm and even. She explained that she was a paying customer, that she'd purchased tea less than 40 minutes ago, that she was simply working on her laptop, like half the people in the room. Monaco's jaw tightened. The manager had called about trespassing. She was making people uncomfortable just by being there. Time to go. Gilbert's stomach tightened. She recognized what was happening. This wasn't about loitering. This wasn't about policy or procedure. This was about a manager who'd looked at a black woman in an upscale tea house and decided she didn't belong. She reached into her purse, slowly, deliberately, keeping her movements visible. She withdrew, her credentials, a black leather fold with the Central Intelligence Agency seal embossed in gold, a holographic identification card, a badge that carried the weight of 17 years protecting national security. She opened it and held it up at eye level. The words came out clear, professional, unshaken. Special Agent Joann Gilbert, Central Intelligence Agency, 17 years of service. She was off duty, simply having tea before a meeting. And this was a mistake. Monaco glanced at the badge. His expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. Anyone could print a fake badge these days. Anyone could buy credentials online. He'd seen it a dozen times, people trying to intimidate their way out of consequences by flashing phony federal IDs. He ordered her to stand and put her hands behind her back. The shop had gone quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Laptops froze. Heads turned. Phones emerged from pockets and bags. Screens glowing as people angled cameras toward the unfolding scene. Gilbert's voice remained measured, but the edge was unmistakable now. The credentials were legitimate federal identification. He could verify them with a single phone call to the Seattle CIA Field Liaison Office. She was asking him, clearly, calmly, to make that call before this went any further. Monaco repeated the command. Stand up, hands behind back. Now. Gilbert understood her options. She could continue asserting her rights and risk this escalating to physical violence in front of witnesses. Or she could comply, let this catastrophic mistake unfold on camera, and deal with the consequences through proper channels afterward. She chose documentation over resistance. Her voice rose just loud enough for the entire shop to hear. She announced that she was complying under protest. She identified herself again, Special Agent Joann Gilbert, Central Intelligence Agency. She stated clearly that this officer was arresting her for sitting in a tea house. She asked everyone present to witness what was happening. She asked them to record it. Several people were already recording. A woman near the counter held her phone at shoulder height. A man at the next table angled his screen to capture the scene. A student by the window filmed openly, no longer pretending to look away. Gilbert stood slowly, closing her laptop with deliberate care. She gathered her belongings into a neat stack: laptop, notebook, phone. Monaco grabbed her arm roughly before she could finish, yanking her away from the table. The force was unnecessary and deliberate. Gilbert stated clearly that she was complying. There was no need for physical force. Monaco ignored her. He spun her around, pulling her arms behind her back with enough pressure to make her wince. The handcuffs clicked into place, tight, deliberately tight. The metal bit into her wrists. She said nothing. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Monaco announced she was under arrest for trespassing and refusing a lawful order. Gilbert corrected him, her voice steady even as the cuffs dug into her skin. She hadn't refused anything. She'd complied completely. Everyone in the shop had witnessed her compliance. And she wasn't trespassing. She was a paying customer who'd violated no policy and committed no crime. The crowd had grown. Someone near the door called out that this was wrong, that she hadn't done anything. Another voice noted she'd been sitting there quietly for half an hour, that nobody had complained, that she'd just been working on her computer, like everyone else. Monaco ignored them all. He marched Gilbert toward the door, still handcuffed, her laptop and purse abandoned on the table behind her. Patrons stood now, phones raised, filming the entire exit. The assistant manager, Ethan Caldwell, stood frozen behind the counter, his face pale, realizing too late what he'd set in motion. Outside, rain fell in steady sheets. Monaco guided Gilbert toward his patrol car, parked at an angle in front of the tea house. Water soaked into her blouse within seconds. Her hair clung to her face. The handcuffs made it impossible to shield herself. Gilbert spoke Monaco's name aloud, reading it from his nameplate, her voice calm and clinical. She stated for the record that he was arresting a federal agent without cause, that he'd refused to verify her credentials, that he'd used unnecessary force, and that he was doing it in front of dozens of witnesses. She told him this would end his career. Monaco opened the back door of the patrol car without responding. He placed his hand on top of her head and guided her into the back seat, the motion practiced and impersonal. He closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and got behind the wheel. As he pulled away from the curb, Gilbert looked back through the rain-streaked window. People stood outside the tea house now, phones still raised, recording the patrol car as it disappeared down Pine Street. The story was already spreading. Videos were already uploading. The damage was already irreversible. Why do some officers interpret calm professionalism and federal credentials as deception? Comment your thoughts. The drive to the King County Sheriff's Precinct took 12 minutes. Gilbert spent every second of it building her case. She cataloged times, statements, physical actions. She noted the unnecessary force, the refusal to verify, the public humiliation. She'd testified in classified hearings before congressional intelligence committees. She'd briefed cabinet-level officials on threats to national security. She knew how to construct airtight documentation, and this case was building itself with every passing minute. They arrived at the precinct just before 9 in the morning. Monaco walked her inside, still handcuffed, past the front desk where Captain Derek Langford looked up from a stack of incident reports with immediate alarm. Captain Derek Langford had been with the King County Sheriff's Office for 23 years, long enough to recognize a bad arrest the moment it walked through his precinct doors. The sight of Sheriff Walter Monaco parading a handcuffed black woman in professional attire past the front desk triggered every institutional alarm Langford had learned to trust. Monaco delivered his report with clipped efficiency. Trespassing at Summit Street Tea House. Subject refused to leave when ordered by management and by law enforcement. Subject resisted lawful commands. Gilbert spoke before Langford could respond, her voice clear and controlled, despite the handcuffs biting into her wrists. She identified herself as Special Agent Joann Gilbert, Central Intelligence Agency, Counterintelligence Division. She recited her badge number from memory. She explained that she'd been sitting in a tea house conducting work when the manager called police because she was black. She stated that Sheriff Monaco had arrested her after she showed him her federal credentials, which he'd dismissed as fake. She noted that she'd complied completely with every command. She emphasized that there had been no resistance whatsoever, and she made clear that the entire incident had been recorded on video by multiple witnesses. Langford's face went pale. He stood from his desk, his chair scraping against the floor. He looked at Monaco with an expression that moved from confusion to disbelief in the span of seconds. Monaco had arrested someone claiming to be CIA after she'd shown credentials. Monaco pulled the credentials from his pocket and handed them over with a shrug, explaining that anyone could fake a badge these days. The captain could check if he wanted, but he'd done what the manager requested, removed a trespassing subject who refused to comply. Langford examined the credentials with the careful attention of someone who'd seen enough federal identification to know the real thing. The black leather case, the embossed seal, the holographic overlay on the photo ID, the weight and texture of the badge itself. Everything about them screamed authentic. He looked up at Gilbert, then back at the credentials, then at Monaco, with something approaching horror. These were real. Monaco started to object, but Langford cut him off. He picked up the phone on his desk, his movements sharp with barely controlled anger. He was calling the CIA Seattle Field Liaison Office right now. Verification would take 3 minutes. As the captain dialed and the room held its breath, the weight of the moment settled over everyone present. Do you think businesses should face real consequences when their staff call law enforcement on paying customers purely out of bias. Type your thoughts below if you've ever seen something like this unfold, or share this if you believe accountability starts with calling it out. The phone connected. Langford identified himself, provided Gilbert's badge number, and requested immediate verification of status. The response came back within 90 seconds, crackling over the speakerphone so everyone in the booking area could hear. Confirmed. Special Agent Joann Gilbert, active duty, Counterintelligence Division, 17 years of distinguished service. Then the liaison's voice changed. The professional courtesy evaporated, replaced by something cold and dangerous. The liaison asked where Agent Gilbert was now, why the inquiry was being made, and whether there was a security concern. Langford explained the situation in terse, economical sentences. Local manager called in a trespassing complaint. Sheriff Monaco responded and made an arrest. Agent Gilbert showed credentials. They were not verified prior to arrest. She was currently in custody, handcuffed at the precinct. The silence on the other end of the line lasted 3 seconds. Then the liaison's voice returned, ice cold and razor sharp. Agent Gilbert had not been having tea. She'd been conducting low-profile surveillance on a suspected foreign operative who had been using Summit Street Tea House as a dead-drop site for classified intelligence transfers. The operation had been running for 11 months. The surveillance had been coordinated with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division and the National Security Council. The arrest and public spectacle had just blown her cover, exposed the operation to the target, and jeopardized a year-long national security investigation, tracking potential espionage activity linked to a hostile foreign intelligence service. Langford's face drained of all color. His hand tightened on the phone. He looked at Monaco, then at Gilbert, then back at Monaco, with an expression that contained no mercy whatsoever. He ordered Monaco to remove the handcuffs immediately. Monaco's hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs. Gilbert rubbed her wrists slowly, deliberately. The red marks where the metal had dug into her skin were vivid against her brown skin, visible, documented, undeniable. Langford's voice dropped to something quiet and lethal. He demanded Monaco's badge and service weapon. On the spot, right now. Monaco stammered something about following procedure, about responding to the manager's call, about doing his job. Langford cut him off. He cited Monaco's record, 14 prior complaints, 5 sustained findings of racial profiling and excessive use of force, a documented pattern of targeting people of color in spaces where he didn't think they belonged. He noted the department's failure to act, the repeated warnings that had been ignored, the evaluations that had recommended additional training, but never imposed real consequences. And now Monaco had arrested a CIA agent conducting a classified national security operation. He'd blown her cover. He'd compromised an 11-month counterintelligence investigation. He'd interfered with a protected federal asset. Monaco handed over his badge and service weapon, his face slack with the first real understanding of what he'd done. The CIA liaison's voice came through the speaker again, calm but unambiguous. Sheriff Monaco had just interfered with a protected federal asset engaged in national security operations. The agency would be filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice and coordinating with FBI leadership to assess the operational damage. Legal counsel for Agent Gilbert would be in contact within 24 hours. Langford asked the liaison what else the precinct could do. The response was brief. Uncuff Agent Gilbert. Provide her with a private space to make secure calls. Return all her personal belongings immediately. And stay out of the way. Langford turned to Gilbert, his voice stripped of the earlier authority, replaced by something closer to contrition. He offered her coffee, a quiet office, access to a secure line. He apologized on behalf of the department, though the words felt inadequate against the scale of what had just occurred. Gilbert accepted the offer with a nod. She said nothing else. She was building her case, and every word from this point forward would matter in ways Monaco was only beginning to comprehend. The chapter closed with Monaco, standing in the center of the bullpen, stripped of badge and weapon, surrounded by fellow deputies who avoided eye contact. The first cracks in his world had appeared, and they were spreading fast. Across the room, Gilbert sat in a quiet office with the door closed, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and steady as she made the calls that would dismantle everything Monaco had built over 9 years. Her hidden power, 17 years protecting secrets, tracking adversaries, operating in shadows, had finally been acknowledged. But the acknowledgement had come too late to prevent the damage, too late to salvage the operation, and far, far too late to save Walter Monaco's career. Within 3 hours, cell phone videos from Summit Street Tea House began flooding social media. The footage was raw, unedited, damning. Special Agent Joann Gilbert, calmly showing her CIA credentials to Sheriff Monaco. Monaco, dismissing them without verification. Gilbert being yanked from her chair, hands forced behind her back, metal handcuffs snapping into place. The rough march through the crowded tea house, dozens of witnesses recording every step. The exit into the rain, Gilbert's blouse soaked through, her composure intact even as Monaco pushed her into the patrol car. The videos went viral within minutes. Twitter erupted with hashtags, hashtag Tea House Arrest, hashtag CIA While Black, hashtag Seattle Racial Profiling. Instagram stories multiplied. TikTok clips racked up millions of views. Local news stations picked up the story by noon. National outlets followed by evening. The narrative was impossible to ignore. A black CIA agent, 17 years protecting national security, arrested for drinking tea. A sheriff with 14 prior complaints for racial profiling, still on patrol, despite sustained findings of misconduct. A tea house manager who'd called police on a paying customer for no reason other than the color of her skin. The backlash was immediate and unrelenting. The FBI and CIA issued a rare joint statement within 24 hours, condemning the incident in language that was carefully diplomatic, but unmistakably furious. The statement confirmed that Special Agent Gilbert had been engaged in authorized intelligence activities when she was unlawfully detained, that her civil rights had been violated, and that the incident had caused significant operational damage to an ongoing national security investigation. Civil rights organizations responded with coordinated fury. The NAACP demanded a federal investigation into the King County Sheriff's Office. The ACLU filed an administrative complaint. Black Lives Matter Seattle organized protests outside the precinct. Community leaders called press conferences. Elected officials issued statements. Ethan Caldwell, the 25-year-old assistant manager, who'd made the 911 call, was fired by the Summit Street Tea House corporate office within 36 hours. The audio of his call to dispatch leaked online. His description of Gilbert as someone loitering and making customers uneasy, despite his own admission that she'd purchased tea and hadn't violated any policy. The leak destroyed what remained of his credibility. The tea house chain issued a public apology, announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, and quietly began settlement negotiations before a lawsuit could even be filed. The lawsuit came anyway. Gilbert versus Sheriff Walter Monaco, Captain Derek Langford, Ethan Caldwell, Summit Street Tea House Incorporated, and King County. The claims were comprehensive and devastating. Unlawful arrest, false imprisonment, excessive use of force, racial discrimination under federal civil rights statutes, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and the claim that elevated this from a civil rights case to a national security nightmare, interference with authorized intelligence operations. The evidence was overwhelming. Body camera footage from Monaco's uniform showed the entire encounter in excruciating detail. Cell phone videos from witnesses corroborated every element of Gilbert's account. The 911 call audio documented Caldwell's racial bias in his own words. Monaco's personnel file contained 14 complaints, 5 with sustained findings, and a clear pattern of targeting black and brown individuals. The CIA's internal damage assessment quantified the operational losses. An 11-month surveillance operation compromised. A foreign intelligence asset. Alerted to U.S. monitoring. Potential national security risks that would take years to mitigate. The county's legal team reviewed the case and reached a conclusion within weeks. This was unwinnable. The optics were catastrophic. The evidence was ironclad. The damages would be astronomical. Settlement negotiations began in March and concluded in November. The final amount stunned even experienced civil rights attorneys, $15.3 million. King County's insurance and general fund would cover $13.2 million. Summit Street. Tea House's liability policy would contribute $2.1 million. The settlement was one of the largest in Washington state history for a wrongful arrest case. But the money was only the beginning. Sheriff Walter Monaco was terminated immediately, effective the day the settlement was announced. His name was added to the National Law Enforcement Decertification Index, a permanent record that would prevent him from ever working in law enforcement again in any jurisdiction. At 34 years old, after 9 years in uniform, his career was over. The termination letter cited gross misconduct, violation of civil rights, interference with federal operations, and a sustained pattern of racial profiling, documented over his entire tenure. The Department of Justice launched a formal pattern or practice investigation into the entire King County Sheriff's Office, examining years of complaint data, use of force statistics, and internal disciplinary procedures. The investigation mirrored similar federal inquiries that had led to consent decrees and court-ordered oversight in police departments across the country. The findings were released 6 months later. Systemic failures in accountability, inadequate supervision, insufficient training on implicit bias and de-escalation, and a departmental culture that protected officers with documented patterns of misconduct. The DOJ mandated sweeping reforms, mandatory verification of all federal credentials before any arrest, automatic review and disciplinary action after 5 sustained complaints, civilian oversight boards with subpoena power, and quarterly reporting to federal monitors. Captain Derek Langford, though not terminated, was reassigned to administrative duties and stripped of supervisory responsibilities. The investigation found that he'd been aware of Monaco's complaint history, but had failed to recommend meaningful discipline or removal from patrol duties. The county council held public hearings. Community members packed the chambers, demanding accountability and systemic change. And on a cold afternoon in December, Special Agent Joann Gilbert sat at the witness table and delivered testimony that would be quoted in civil rights litigation for years to come. She described the humiliation of being arrested for simply existing in a public space. She spoke of the deeper pain, knowing that this happened daily to Black Americans who didn't carry federal badges, who didn't have the institutional power to fight back, who would be dismissed and forgotten. She talked about the chilling realization that even 17 years protecting her country, even credentials from one of the most elite intelligence agencies in the world, hadn't been enough to shield her from the assumptions that Sheriff Monaco and Ethan Caldwell had made the moment they saw her skin color. The hearing room was silent when she finished. Several council members had tears in their eyes. The testimony was replayed on news broadcasts that evening, shared thousands of times online, and cited in pending civil rights cases across the country. The final scenes played out in fragments over the following months. Walter Monaco sat alone in a studio apartment in Tacoma, staring at the termination letter that had arrived by certified mail. No pension, no references, no prospects. His name was now permanently associated with one of the most high-profile wrongful arrest cases in modern history. He'd destroyed a national security operation, cost taxpayers $15 million, and become a symbol of everything wrong with American policing. He'd thought he was doing his job. He'd been certain she didn't belong, and he'd never once questioned his own judgment. Summit Street Tea House issued a second public apology, this one accompanied by a 10-point plan for anti-bias training, community oversight, and partnerships with civil rights organizations. The corporate office hired a chief diversity officer. New policies prohibited staff from calling law enforcement on customers unless there was an immediate safety threat. Every employee underwent mandatory training on implicit bias and de-escalation, and Special Agent Joann Gilbert returned to work. The surveillance operation had been salvaged, though at great cost. The target had been alerted by the arrest, but counterintelligence teams had adapted, shifting resources and recalibrating their approach. The damage was real, but not irreparable. Gilbert's cover was blown for that particular operation, but 17 years of service had taught her how to adapt, how to move forward, how to continue the mission even when the world had tried to stop her. She sat in a briefing room at the Seattle CIA field office, 3 months after the settlement, reviewing new assignments, her quiet power intact. The badge that Monaco had dismissed as fake now rested in a display case in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, part of an exhibit on Black women in intelligence. Her story had become a symbol, not of victimhood, but of resilience, of the daily reality that systemic racism operated even in spaces designed to be protected. The story closed on a reflective note, the narrator's voice steady and deliberate. Systemic racism doesn't always roar. It doesn't always arrive in dramatic confrontations or violent altercations. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers in the assumptions a manager makes when he sees a black woman in an upscale tea house. It whispers in the judgment of a sheriff who sees a threat instead of a guardian of national secrets. It whispers in the institutional failures that allow 14 complaints to accumulate without consequence, in the culture that protects officers who operate on bias rather than evidence. But sometimes someone with hidden strength forces the world to listen. Sometimes the quiet professional sitting in the corner with her tea and her laptop turns out to be the person who's been protecting you all along. And when that truth is finally revealed, it costs $15 million, destroys careers, and changes policies. If these stories matter to you, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, share this video. We're not stopping, and neither should you.